U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken was on a 3-day visit to China, which was supposed to lead to an improvement in relations, but on the contrary, it led to a rather uphill in relations. And then, unexpectedly, the entrepreneur Elon Musk arrived in China. Why did he come? Well, that is one of the biggest questions we're going to talk about today. And in the meantime, things started going completely in the wrong directions, notwithstanding the attempt, apparently, at a diplomatic solution to growing differences between the two countries. From Monday onwards, the economic relationships between the US and China began to wither sharply. Continuing about the US-China political relationship, as the TikTok issue was initially discussed, China's intervention in the US elections, and now after the latest sanctions that were announced as the sanctions against Russia, it turns out the main victims are Chinese companies that work with Russia. So this package of sanctions is against China rather than against Russia. It is not that they have not affected both countries though, but as one might assume, Ukraine is the center of this problem, or so it seems. But what caused this fallout? And how far could it actually go? That's what we're going to talk in today's video. In addition, it's good to note that very soon, from the 5th to the 10th of May, Chinese President Xi Jinping is coming on a big visit to Europe. He'll first be visiting Serbia, then Hungary, and France. And it will be interesting to see whether the general European policy towards China would really change, because it appears that Brussels is watching and doing every move Washington is currently on with, because that's where the ones about banning TikTok in Europe came in. But more on that in a moment. Now, for those of you who haven't subscribed yet, subscribe so you can follow our channel. We'll be releasing new videos regularly, and hopefully we'll be able to keep doing it. And it depends largely and simply on our support that we get from subscriptions and views. Naturally, back to the main topic we're going to talk about today. The American visit to China. Where has it led? Because he went officially with one goal. He still accomplished something, though completely different. Of course, we can never be sure what the original purpose was, but it was billed as an idea to improve relationships between China and the US. This is actually his second visit this year, something quite significant. Apart from anything else, you will remember that last year there was a meeting between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden, which I would also say is an indicative of the attempts to stabilize ties. The end result is that they go on exactly the opposite direction. Because of that, these are amazing adventures. Apart from anything else though, there is a faint rift within the American position itself, because the big entrepreneurs such as Elon Musk are worried about the direction in which relationships between the two superpowers are heading. What can we say about Blinken's visit? Well, he arrived first in Shanghai, where he was greeted remarkably by the Secretary of Shanghai City Party Commute, Jiang Qing, which, as you might have guessed yourself, is not the highest level. The US explained that this meeting was initially about contacts with Chinese business. It is not a coincidence that they are in Shanghai, because there are a lot of big companies there which have a slightly different status than the rest of China. Accordingly, the United States was interested in this. But I would say that on the Chinese side, the demonstration was clear enough from the beginning. It wasn't an important member of the government, but a local party official who met the Secretary of State. Naturally, from there on, things went in the expected direction. First of all, he was received by the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, and then he had a meeting with the country's President Xi Jinping. Everyone expected that this would lead to some kind of mending of relations, but as soon as he arrived, Blinken launched a very strong political attack on China. He said on several occasions while he was in China that they had problems with the relationship between Beijing and Moscow. And finally, in the final press conference, he said this: I understand our concerns that China is supplying Russia with special components that support their brutal war against Ukraine. He explained that these components are machinery for industrial production. In addition, microelectronics and nitrosilicos, all of which they say are used to produce both projectiles and other munitions and missiles that are fired at Ukraine. And he said, the big problem in this case is the dual-use goods that China continues to sell to the Russian Federation. Basically, under the terms of the World Trade Organization. They're not really too serious restrictions in that direction, and the Chinese are sticking to that thesis. They say that they abide by absolutely all of the rules of the World Trade Organizations and act accordingly to international law. At this point, the Chinese leadership is reacting quite strongly compared to the way they usually react. Although, if you look at Wang Yi's statement, it sounds extremely strange, and many people cannot get their bearings. Normally, the Chinese are extremely diplomatic, but I will tell you, the exact words of the Chinese foreign minister that sounded something like, possessive actions in bilateral relations are increasing, but negative factors are intensifying as core Chinese interests are affected. End quote. And here comes the important element. The US must not cross red lines related to sovereignty, security, and development, which means that it must not increase its influence on Taiwan and not interfere further into this issue at all. In addition to threatening Chinese security in the South Chinese Sea, the establishment of the political and military blocs in the region. We talk about this topic quite a bit. What they're trying to organize, the US there, it's really a development, and naturally it means the economy, the restriction of the access to high technology, and therefore the hit on trade. At the same time, even as this meeting was going on, the Chinese institutions tried to be optimistic. Even in the most official media, there were articles that at these talks, it was agreed to follow the 5 steps that Xi Jinping and Joe Biden laid out at the time about cooperation in artificial intelligence, about respecting the relationship in the economy, and so on and so on. All of this has not been cancelled, but it is a question of what comes out of this whole story. I mean, they tried to somehow show positive trend by the Chinese, but very quickly things changed, because on Monday in Riyadh, already during this Middle East tour, Blinken directly accused China of helping Russia in the war in Ukraine. And well, here things are largely contradictory, because it seems to me that it has been clear from a long time that China has been trading with Russia. But only now is it coming out to these sanctions. We should be looking at this as some other kind of pretext, rather than the real reason for the tough action by the Democrats. I'll tell you, in this moment, why it seems to me that the war in Ukraine is more of the reason in this case. Otherwise, the Chinese reacted very quickly. Something that is very important is that they reacted very strongly in a way that we have not heard spoken before. I would say at such high level even. There was a reaction from the Foreign Ministry spokesman, Ling Quang, who said that China was neither a creator of Ukraine crisis nor a participant in it. China is dedicated to peace negotiations and to finding a political solution to this situation. Furthermore, he stressed that his country has a right to a normal economic and trade relationship with all countries in the world and has no reasons to comply with the decides of other countries on whom they can have economic relationships with. And then we came to a very interesting statement. It is quite clear to everyone who is fueling and depending on the crisis. Here too, the Chinese representative stressed that they're abiding by absolutely all the rules of world trade and the World Trade Organization, and he tried to dispel doubts that China has a deliberate policy of supporting Russian military production. You might have noticed in one of our previous speakings, we commented on the decision in Chinese trade with Russia this year. To a large extent, the concerns are about exactly that type of American relation, and it is starting to become clear that clearly the American reaction has come. Moreover, the Chinese representative rejected outright his accusations that the country intended to interfere in the US elections, because earlier Blinken reported that China is expected to have a direct intervention into the elections, pinpointing TikTok as one of the options for an intervention. I should say here, you already know about the decided decision by the US Congress to subsequently President Biden to look into banning TikTok if it's not sold to Americans. If the company does not sell its business to the States or an American company, and naturally, ByteDance, the company that holds the Chinese government's ticker, said that this was blackmail and that they had no intention of doing anything like this. The position of the Democrats, though, I would say is quite strange because Biden immediately signed the bill for the future ban, which should be in spring of next year. The 25th could possibly be delayed on an additional 90 days, but it's unclear what will happen by then. And just as he signed the bill, his campaign continues to be very active on TikTok. He made an account there before this whole banning scandal started, although it's been going on for quite some time, which I find to an extent fascinating. On the other hand, there's an interesting element that practically his entire team is working extremely actively on TikTok. The concern of American business is that nearly $23 billion could be lost if TikTok is closed to the US, and many businesses will go bankrupt as a consequence of not having this platform. Against the backdrop of this extremely complicated relationship, Elon Musk made an unexpected trip to China. He was rumored to be going to Beijing Motor Show, but was greeted by the Chinese premier Li Qiang. Officially, according to these press reports that have come out, although they're not very detailed, they're said to have discussed possibly allowing autopilots for Tesla cars in China, because this is one of the most important elements with which Musk manages to fight the competition. The bigger competition at the moment is naturally coming from China. One of Tesla's biggest factories outside the US is in China, and accordingly, the Chinese market is key for them. This shows that there is a certain serious concern on the part of American business about the direction in which relationships with Beijing are beginning to develop. And I think Musk has also been able to present additional political messages, but they're probably coming from more of a Republican sector. Not that he's directly affiliated with them, but there's definitely some similar type of sympathy. What we cannot be sure of, however, is exactly what these political messages were. Undoubtedly, the key thing for this is the opportunity to maintain its presence in the Chinese market and to try to somehow get out of the complex situation that it's taking into shape. What is very important, though, is to know that it's extremely key for Tesla to use the Chinese infrastructure to train their autopilots, my bad. Because the movement there is a little bit different. It's also one of the most advanced and extensive transportation infrastructures in the world right now. Being quite logical, they may want to train their algorithms there so they can then apply them elsewhere. It was not very clear how applicable they will be in Europe, for example, or in India. But anyways, what is seen there? What is seen here exactly? This desire to preserve business in the first place, to preserve business and relations. Besides, talking from the Chinese side, you can see how high level it is. We can't even talk about the comparison here with the way Blinken was received, which is weird. You notice all of a sudden American businessmen have a much different relationship with Chinese leadership than the official state structures. Historically, though, I have to say that there was such a thing in the USA at earlier stages in creation of the Soviet Union. Many American businessmen were actively working with the Soviet state, while the government was in no way willing to recognize it. Well, it seems, I think such parallels can be drawn. I mean, both of them are communistic. But it remains to be seen, of course, in what direction all of this will go. Here we come to the next element that has manifested itself in recent days. These are the sanctions that we've been talking about. They're very far-reaching indeed. A total of 280 companies fall under the US sanctions, which are imposed officially against Russia. In reality, the companies that trade with Russia. There are 280 proposed by the Treasury Department, and at least 20 of them are major companies in China and Hong Kong that trade directly with Russia. Maybe there are even much more. Secretary Yellen stated that they have warned Chinese companies about the consequences. And it's something that is quite logical. Like here, it was absolutely clearly commented the Chinese line. It's clearly shown to the Chinese that these sanctions are against China's engagement with Russia. At the same time, the Chinese envoy to the US reacted immediately. He said that we firmly oppose the illegal, unilateral, sanctions that have been imposed. In addition, companies from Azerbaijan, Belgium, Turkey, and Slovakia are under sanctions. Oh, here is Belgium, Slovakia. But there is no reaction from the European Union. And from here, it's no longer clear at all how these events will unfold. You know, Olaf Scholz's visit did not get well at all. It's now interesting to see what the Chinese president will be able to achieve on his tour in Europe. Certainly, the parties have been selected quite clearly because the aim is to change the overall trend of opposition. And there is some hope that such a thing can happen. And what are the reasons for these Democrats' actions and for these sanctions? To me, we have to look here more of the problem that is taking shape around the TikTok issue. As strange as it may sound, the overall focus of American politics at the moment is future elections. And since the consensus has emerged on Ukraine, quite logically, this could be used as some kind of element to explain their policy towards China. Otherwise, the disconnect in United States with the decision taken on TikTok is very great. And as I said, it could seriously damage the results of the Democrats. It's strange that Donald Trump, who previously had very different positions and was one of the people who started the opposition on TikTok, my bad, specifically had subsequently completely changed his view and is now very moderate in that direction. You know, it was around his time the trade war with Ukraine started to go rough. There was an exception. The Democrats would go in a different direction. It turns out the contrary things continue in the exact same direction. Clearly, the US continues to see China as its most key adversary globally. And here it is, just the Ukrainian threat that is being used as an opportunity to show that China is the real adversary, that China is the one pulling the strings, that they're the ones who are fomenting the Ukrainian war. And therefore, they have access to the United States through their social networks, and thus, they can also control the development of the American society by imposing their position through these networks, and therefore, decomposing the whole system. It seems to me that this is strange, and as strange as it may sound, one of the key elements here. The very fact that the American business reacted extremely quickly, even before the sanctions came out, to have Elon Musk go there so that he could ensure that he would continue to work with the Chinese. There is an indefinite serious split in the assessments of the future of the relationship. But it also demonstrates to us the fact that in Washington, they're basically prepared to sacrifice everything in order to achieve a possible electoral victory. Well, a very difficult year is coming. We have yet to see how events will unfold on a global scale. It is also very interesting to see what the outcome of Xi Jinping's trip will be. And, well, I'll keep an eye on it and tell you as soon as I get something. See you soon.